the 17-year-old boy who built Subway. Today, Subway is one of the most recognized restaurant names in the world. But its story did not begin with a wealthy businessman, a famous chef, or a giant corporation. It began with a 17-year-old boy who was simply trying to find enough money to go to college. His name was Fred DeLuca. A boy who needed money for college. Fred DeLuca was born in Brooklyn, New York, in 1947. His father worked in a factory, and Fred did not grow up with the kind of money needed to easily pay for higher education. After finishing high school, Fred dreamed of attending college and eventually entering medicine. He was working at a local hardware store, but his wages were not enough to cover his college expenses. In 1965, Fred spoke with a family friend named Dr. Peter Buck, a nuclear physicist. Fred hoped Buck might have some advice about how he could earn more money. Peter Buck gave him a surprising suggestion. "Why don't you open a submarine sandwich shop?" Then Buck did something that would change Fred's life. He gave the 17-year-old $1,000 to start the business. With that money and little experience, Fred decided to try. He knew almost nothing about restaurants. Fred was only 17. He wasn't a trained chef. He didn't have a business degree. He didn't have years of restaurant experience. In fact, Fred later admitted that when he started, he knew very little about making sandwiches or running a food business. Still, he rented a small location in Bridgeport, Connecticut, built a simple counter, bought supplies, and opened his restaurant in August 1965. They called it Pete's Super Submarines. The name honored Peter Buck, the man who had given Fred his chance. Opening day looked promising. Customers came in and bought sandwiches. Fred might have thought, maybe this is going to work. But the excitement didn't last. The first shop started losing money. Fred had made an important mistake. The location wasn't good. After about 6 months, business became so poor that Fred and Peter seriously considered closing the restaurant. For most people, that might have been the end. The first restaurant isn't working? Close it. But Fred and Peter did something completely unexpected. Instead of closing the first restaurant, they opened another one. Fred later explained that they wanted people to see multiple restaurants and feel that this must be a successful business. The second location was more visible. And slowly, things began improving. Eventually they opened a third restaurant, and the business finally started gaining strength. Even the name caused problems. There was another problem. When they advertised Pete's Submarines on the radio, some listeners reportedly thought they were hearing something like Pizza Marines. That wasn't good for a sandwich shop. So the name evolved. Pete's Super Submarines became Pete's Subway and eventually simply Subway. The name that millions of people would eventually recognize around the world. They had a crazy goal. Fred and Peter had set themselves a goal. 32 restaurants within 10 years. But by 1974, they had only 16 restaurants. They were only halfway there. Again, Fred faced a decision. Accept that the dream had failed. Or find another way. That was when Subway made one of the most important decisions in its history. Franchising. Instead of Fred and Peter having to personally open every restaurant, other entrepreneurs could open Subway restaurants using their system and brand. And suddenly, Subway began spreading far beyond Connecticut. Then Subway discovered a different identity. Subway wasn't selling hamburgers and French fries. Customers could watch their sandwich being prepared and choose their own vegetables, meat, and toppings. Over time, Subway increasingly promoted certain sandwiches as a lower-fat alternative to traditional fast food. Then, in the late 1990s, something happened that Subway's founders could never have planned. A college student named Jared Fogle became connected with the brand. The man who lost 245 pounds. Jared was a student at Indiana University. At his heaviest, he said he weighed about 425 pounds. There was a Subway restaurant near where he lived. Jared created his own extremely restrictive eating routine that included Subway sandwiches, and he also increased his physical activity. Over approximately 11 months, he reportedly lost an astonishing 245 pounds. He went from around 425 pounds to about 190 pounds. His transformation attracted attention. First came a university newspaper story. Then national media noticed him. And eventually Subway noticed him too. In January 2000, Subway aired its first television advertisement featuring Jared and his enormous old pants. For millions of Americans, the message was powerful. This man had lost 245 pounds while eating Subway sandwiches. Subway suddenly had something its competitors struggled to offer: a healthier fast food image. The advertising campaign became enormously successful. The Washington Post reported that Subway sales increased by almost 20% during 2000, and over the following years the company continued expanding rapidly. But there is an important point. Jared's dramatic weight loss should not be understood as proof that simply eating Subway causes weight loss. His routine involved severe calorie restriction and exercise, and even his father later cautioned that the diet was not nutritionally balanced. From $1,000 to a global empire, Subway kept growing. By 2011, the company had more restaurant locations worldwide than McDonald's and was being described as the world's largest restaurant chain by number of locations. Think about where it started. A 17-year-old boy needed money for college. A family friend gave him $1,000. His first restaurant began losing money. His location was bad. His name confused customers. He had no great restaurant experience. And after almost 10 years, he had reached only half of his original expansion goal. But Fred DeLuca kept changing what wasn't working. Bad location? Find a better one. Confusing name? Change it. Can't open enough restaurants yourself? Franchise them. And eventually that small sandwich shop became one of the biggest restaurant businesses in history. There is an unfortunate ending to the Jared Fogle part of Subway's history. Years after becoming Subway's famous spokesman, Fogle became involved in serious criminal conduct involving minors. Subway ended its relationship with him in 2015, and he was subsequently convicted and imprisoned. So his later life should never be celebrated. But historically, his weight loss advertising campaign remains an important part of explaining how Subway became strongly associated with lower-fat fast food choices during its enormous growth period. Fred DeLuca did not begin Subway because he dreamed of becoming a billionaire. He began because he needed money for college. The first store struggled. The second store was a gamble. The company missed its original growth target. But every time Fred faced a problem, he tried another solution. And the teenager who once worried about paying his college tuition eventually built a restaurant empire known around the world. Sometimes success doesn't begin with a perfect idea. Sometimes it begins with a problem you desperately need to solve.